Welcome back to the Book Club. I'm Michael Knowles, and this month we will be discussing Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, because we are living in a brave new world. First, though, in our fast-paced world, it's tough to make reading a priority. At least it used to be. But at thinker.org, they summarize the key ideas from new and noteworthy nonfiction, giving you access to an entire library of great books in bite-sized form. You can read or listen to hundreds of titles in a matter of minutes, from old classics like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, to recent bestsellers like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. If you want to challenge your preconceptions, if you want to expand your horizons, if you want to sound smart at cocktail parties, most important of all, go to thinker.org. That is THINKR. No E. No time for that. .org to start a free trial and put your mind in motion. We'll be discussing this book about a dystopian future, with one of these statesmen helping to fight against the dystopian present, my favorite podcast co-host, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, thank you for being here.
Michael, it is terrific to be with you.
So, this is technically a work of fiction.
Other than the fact that it describes virtually every aspect of reality and where we find ourselves today, yes, other than that it is.
Other than that, it is fiction. I'll give a quick summary for those who haven't read it yet, though you should read it. This book, Brave New World, describes this dystopian future sometime around the year 2500 in our years. But they don't go by our years, which is AD, the year of our Lord. They go by AF, the year of our Ford. This is this future in which they don't worship the Lord, they worship Henry Ford. He's kind of the founder. They don't make the sign of the cross. They make the sign of the T, like the Model T. They worship technology to a degree. And another form of our Lord is Freud. They'll refer to Freud. So sex, promiscuity is rampant and encouraged. And actually monogamy and family and the relationship between a husband and a wife or a mother and a son, completely, it's profane. It's pornographic. You couldn't even discuss something like familial love. In this world, babies are bred in little pods. There is no family. One of the lines that keeps coming up is everyone belongs to everyone else. And there are some savages who still have the remnants of the old civilization, but they are not part of the new civilization. And these savages, they have little scraps of paper from the past, like, oh, I don't know, this guy William Shakespeare, for instance. And so in the story, you have the protagonist, John, also known as the Savage. He's the savage who comes into civilization, and he's the only one with any even semblance of this old society that we all cherish, and this sense of morality, and this sense of love of God, and wanting to be monogamous. And he doesn't fit in this world, in what we would call a totalitarian future, a communist future, or any term you want. He wants to engage in old notions of nobility, heroism, struggle, love, religion. He cannot do that. And by the end of the book, spoiler alert, he hangs himself. He can't survive in that world. Why, Senator, did you have us read such a depressing and totally recognizable book?
Because it speaks profound truths. You know, it's interesting. Let me first of all say, a book club is a fabulous thing. Like books... I was making fun of you that you have a book club with a bookshelf with no books on it.
Sort of sparse. It's a new show. You know?
But you know, I'm reminded of the opening of The Princess Bride. In my time, television was called books. And in this case, books is called podcast.
That's right.
So it's all a continuum. So I have to admit, when you asked me to do this, and you and I do our Verdict podcast together every week, so it was a good chance to come and do your podcast. But we talked about different topics to do, and the last time I read Brave New World, I was 13.
Huh.
So I remember it well because I read it in the year 1984. I was in 8th grade, and my 8th grade teacher, Mr. Waugh, he thought it was very clever to assign 1984 in 1984.
Right.
And we read 1984, we read Brave New World, and we read Animal Farm.
Huh.
And if you want a stunning indictment of soulless, godless, totalitarian domination, read any of those three, or ideally all of those three. Now, Brave New World, it starts, the beginning of it, it starts in a factory.
Yeah.
But it is a factory that is horrifying in its banality.
Hmm.
It is a factory that is constructing embryos, and it's constructing embryos moving along a conveyor belt. Now, how do you construct embryos? Well, in this society, they've discovered that smart people, they've discovered that people with individualism, they've discovered people with ambition, they've discovered people with dreams and hopes and adventure and imagination, all of that's dangerous.
Very dangerous.
So the bulk of what they do to the embryos is damage them. They poison them. They suppress them. They actually cause them to divide. That they have this process where they'll cause an embryo to divide, and they'll get like 90 different identical twins designed to be factory workers who will all work side by side, looking identical, and being stunted. And it begins with, I mean, it's a chilling description of the manufacture of people and manufacture of people at different levels. So the top people, the best looking, the smartest are the alphas.
Yeah.
And the alpha plus pluses. They're alphas, they're betas, they're deltas, they're epsilons. And the working classes, they deliberately deaden their minds, they deaden their ambitions. And it's all designed to produce a subservient collective.
Yeah.
Reading it now, the similarities, to communism.
Yeah.
Communism is the ultimate totalitarian communal state. Everyone belongs to everyone. So it's interesting. In Brave New World, there are all of these truisms that sound wonderful, but they're all about destroying self, destroying who you are.
They're all perverse. They're all, they're even, every expectation you would have of a good society, this is inverted. So for instance, the sort of chief female character, Lenina, is scolded by her friend because she's not being promiscuous enough. She's spending too long dating just one man. You're not allowed to, that's very scandalous. You have to date lots of different men. Every moral expectation we would have gets inverted.
So I have to say, all right, so I read it when I was 13. 13-year-olds are not the most incisive of souls.
Fair enough.
I read it again on my Kindle, on my iPad. And when you just said her name, it's interesting how the mind works. So I read her name as Lenina. And Lenina is a much better way to put it because the other protagonist is Bernard Marx. Now, pause for a second and think about the names Marx and Lenin. And when you said that, I'll have to admit, I just read the whole book and didn't pick up on Lenina when I heard it as Lenina. If you look at, I'm going to call her Lenina because Lenina sounds weird. But
we know who they're talking about.
Okay.
We know who they're referring
to.
She's
beautiful. She's voluptuous.
Yeah.
By the way, she lives in a society. You talk about sex and promiscuity. When they say everyone belongs to everyone, people go that there are no husbands, there are no wives, there are no mothers and fathers. So mother is considered an obscenity.
It's like the F word. It'd be like a vulgar word.
It's worse. It's terrifying. And one of the things to understand. So look, I view this from the perspective of all of us today, or in this book, are creatures of our family story.
Yeah.
I think of it from the perspective of Cuba, where as you know, my dad was imprisoned and tortured in Cuba. My aunt, my tia Sonia, was imprisoned and tortured in Cuba. If you look at communism, communism seeks to destroy any and all allegiances because your only allegiance can be to the state. So it seeks to destroy familial allegiances. In a communist country, you're encouraged to report on your mother, report on your father. They don't yet produce this in bottles, so you still have mothers and fathers.
Not yet. I mean, let's come back in 6 months. It might be a different story.
Faith in God is a fundamental threat to totalitarianism. And my grandmother, my abuela, she was a 6th grade teacher in Cuba. And she told me a story about when Castro took over. And they sent soldiers into the kindergartens and the 1st grades. And they told all the kids, they said, close your eyes and pray to Jesus for candy. And the children all did so. And they opened their eyes and there was no candy. And then the soldier said, close your eyes and pray to Fidel Castro for candy. And they closed their eyes, and the soldiers put little pieces of candy on their chairs, on their desks rather. That is right at the heart of Brave New World.
Well, the first appearance of a Bible in Brave New World is locked in a safe because that's where they keep the pornography from the past, these dirty things that we can't talk, these dangerous things that we can't talk about.
You're right, and the safe is Mustafa Mond, the world controller in London in Europe, who's in charge. And one of the things you learn there, and this is true in totalitarian dictatorships, they're supposed to be egalitarian, but to quote another of the books we were referring to, Animal Farms, all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So Mustafa Mond has in his safe a Bible. He has in his safe Shakespeare. He has literature. They've destroyed all of this.
Yeah.
Because it's a threat to their power. If you look at the communist leaders in China, they live like kings, they live like billionaires, they live like emperors while they oppress the people. That is true over and over and over again of dictatorships.
And what's interesting about Mustafa Mond, the world controller, is when he's asked about the truth of these things, the truth of God's existence, the truth of these things we care about that are utterly denied by this brave new world, he doesn't deny that they could be true. It's not as though he's under the misapprehension that he's keeping all the other people under. He just doesn't care. It must be denied for the society.
It's even more than that. So John the Savage asks Mustafa Mond towards the end of the book, so do you think there's a God? And Mustafa Mond, the world controller, says, I think there probably is.
Very probably there is.
But it is harmful to society. And so there are a couple of elements of this that are particularly acute right now. Number one, a destruction of anything old.
Mm-hmm.
Anything old is bad. Shakespeare doesn't exist. Religion doesn't exist. Literature doesn't exist. Instead, they do these feelies, basically holographic movies, that are sort of somewhere between, sexual adventures and comic books for kids.
Yeah.
Because things that are old make you think, and people who think challenge the orthodoxy. But there's a second component of it, which is a uniformity.
Yes.
They want no one to think for themselves. And if we look at cancel culture, we look at the left today, the radicals who are marching on the streets, the Twitter enforcers who try to silence anyone who dares disagree, they're straight out of Brave New World.
Now, I want to push you a little further on this, because this is the worry to me. If this were strictly describing these communist totalitarian countries, it would be sad, but I'm very fortunate that I don't live in a communist country, at least not yet. But this seems to go further. You know, one aspect that we haven't touched on yet of the story is if a bad idea, if a nasty thought does manage to creep in this totally manicured world, well, they have a little drug. They can take the Soma drug, and it will numb them. There won't be any nasty hangover, and they'll forget, and they'll move on. When I look around at, for instance, the explosion in mind-altering medications and prescriptions in recent years, the explosion of depression, when I look around at the explosion of promiscuity, when I look around at the explosion of burning books, canceling people, as you say, Shakespeare himself taken out of the course requirements, even at the Yale English major, for goodness sakes. When I look at the lord of this society, which is Henry Ford, an American figure, and then I look around my own country these days, what worries do we have that this isn't just some communist dictatorship? They're describing the very place we live.
Deep, deep worries. You know, one of the things Huxley uses to describe Soma, this fictional drug, is he calls it the best of Christianity and alcohol without the side effects.
Yeah.
So it is meant to put people in stupor. And the workers, they're paid in grams of Soma, these pills that put you into this narcotic state with no side effects. So you don't have hangovers, you don't have bad trips, you're just anesthetized. And you look at our society, the triviality of much of our society. See, when I look at Soma, I don't even think of
an actual drug.
Of drugs.
Yeah.
That's an element of it, substance abuse and alcohol abuse. But I think of the triviality of, frankly, where we're sitting, Hollywood, the entertainment culture, the emptiness of celebrity, Twitter, and sadly you and I spend way too much time on Twitter.
And that's our Soma, that's our drug.
But it is empty nothingness. It is the opiate of the masses. What was called religion today, it's just, you look at a athlete or singer. All right, let's take an athlete. Let's take LeBron James, amazing basketball player. But when one general manager in the Houston Rockets dares say, stand for democracy, stand for freedom in Hong Kong, and the Chinese overlords who control the market of 1.3 billion people get mad, LeBron James grovels before the communist overlords, because it doesn't matter that they're murderers, that they're torturers, that they're responsible for a global pandemic. None of that matters. That's the real Soma, is people not focused on truth, on what matters, on what lifts people out of poverty.
This superficiality, this triviality is where, I think it's what takes it from a scary dystopian book to really, really a great book, a classic of the genre. Because one thing that Huxley assails is consumerism. That, look, we all like nice products, we like to buy nice things, but this idea that we are just built to consume and consume and consume with nothing else in this wonderful stasis of having our appetites assuaged. One of the great lines, it's so great they put it on the back of the book, is, I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. And you know what? You can't get any single one of those things in the stable, wonderful, brave new world that Huxley describes.
That is exactly right. In the Kindle version, at the end of the book, they have sort of several add-ons. And one of the things that's interesting that I hadn't read before is they have a letter to George Orwell. So Huxley wrote Brave New World. Orwell wrote 1984. He mailed it to Huxley. Huxley had moved to California.
Because Huxley wrote this book about 17, 18 years before George Orwell wrote.
I think 1931 is when
it was 1931 and then 1948.
So this is a letter written from Wrightwood, California to George Orwell, and it's on the 21st of October, 1949. And he's just gotten this copy of 1984, and Huxley is there. But there's one portion that really jumped out of the letter from Huxley to Orwell. Within the next generation, I believe that the world's rulers will discover that infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis are more efficient as instruments of government than clubs and prisons, and that the lust for power can be just as completely satisfied by suggesting people into loving their servitude as by flogging and kicking them into obedience. And that describes the empty celebrity culture, but also the conformity of today's left. Today's left doesn't want, and so once the babies are born from their bottles, and many of them are stunted deliberately to make them incurious, to make them not terribly bright, but then they're trained so as infants they sleep. They sleep with little speakers under their pillows, repeating this narco-hypnosis.
Sleep learning. And
over and over and over again. It's the messages that they want them to hear. And that's throughout their life. They're also trained, by the way, to dislike books and flowers.
Yes. They're trained from their youth to have an instinctive
like
dislike.
To be sick physically, because toddlers, they put them in, they have them rush in to grab flowers, and then they like make them physically ill to train them these are bad. And you look at now, the premise that most people, the sort of conventional wisdom is that Democrats are the party of the poor, Republicans are the party of the rich. And Democrats are tolerant and acceptable and like diversity.
They're so great.
And every word of that is crap. Like that is a complete and utter lie. Because what does the left say? You must believe the following. If you do not believe exactly what we say, we will drive you out of society. And the truth of the matter is that if you believe in diversity, if you believe in free speech, then you believe in the right of people to disagree with you.
Yeah.
You believe in the right of people to say things that are noxious and grotesque and horrifying, because that's what a free world is.
Right. Well, this question of freedom, what is freedom? It's the parallels to what we have been living through, even though this was written now almost 100 years ago, 90 years ago, are eerie, because we were told, I wasn't even alive, I wasn't even a little glint in my father's eye at the time, but I read that we were told in the books that we still have, that the idea of sexual liberation was that you'll be more free. Break out of these bonds of monogamy and, not having sex before marriage, and break free of that free love and everybody will be free. And what happened? It ends up, in many cases, enslaving people. It enslaves them to their appetites. It separates people. Even the idea, we love individual rights, and yet we know as conservatives, the family, these intermediating institutions, these voluntary associations that we have, those are great buttresses of our freedom, and yet the family is considered slavery in Huxley's book. The family must be destroyed. To become pregnant naturally is considered hideous. It's a great shame. John the Savage's mother, it happens to her. She hides away from her civilization forever. And yet these are the parallels that we're seeing all today. And the questions between these personal matters of, say, sexual liberation and these political matters of how society is ordered, they seem to be very closely associated.
Yes, although I think in the book, the sexual, it's not even liberation, it's libertinism.
Libertinism is the
every
word.
night,
Yeah.
everyone goes out and sleeps with whoever they want. And
Yeah.
every night, and you're obliged to.
Yeah.
And it's not an end, it's a means. So in domination, the reason for it is not that you want lots of people screwing, and they actually have, so many of the infants being made in bottles are rendered sterile. They're called free martins, where they cannot reproduce. It's not to propagate the human race, because the factories are producing the human race. It's rather that, look, human interactions, love is powerful. Love is the all-powerful state wants no loyalties other than to itself. If there is love, what would you not do for your wife? What would you not do for your child? What would you not do for your mom or your dad? The sexual libertinism is not about let's have more screwing. It's about let's have less love.
That's right.
If it is, so one of the more interesting scenes, so John the Savage, who was raised in an Indian reservation that is essentially out of this perfect utopia, he is meeting with this almost like perfect alpha plus Holmes, who's, I picture him like the cartoon Hercules with this square jaw.
He's just perfect specimen.
He's brilliant and perfect. And there's a scene where John the Savage is reading a portion of Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet, two 15-year-olds, a 15-year-old girl, a 15-year-old boy, in love, professing love for each other, and I would die for you. Yeah. And Holmes laughs hysterically. Like he's bent over laughing. He finds it the funniest. Love is such a foreign concept to him.
Ridiculous.
And by the way, fast forward to the end of the book when John the Savage is talking with Mustafa Mond, and he talks about Othello, another Shakespearean play, obviously, and he says, well, why can't we have Othello? He says, well, it's old, but he said it's also tragedy. And in our society, people can't understand tragedy. Yeah. You have to care about something for something to be a tragedy. There's another point, and this is a point that talks about our current society. Nobody grows old. So in this world, the brave new world, chemically, they keep you young, they keep you young, they keep you young. You also embrace death. So life means nothing. So as children, they condition you, they send you to the dying wards. And you're conditioned, you live from 0 to 60 as young, healthy, and strong, and then you die. And part of the reason, and you'll talk about something profound, is to destroy God and destroy religion, because it talks about, as people contemplate death, as they contemplate mortality, as we shuffle off this mortal coil, suddenly you think about the great beyond. You think about
What happens next?
And if you're young and drugged up in blissful, superficial nothingness, then you're less likely to seek out God. And that describes China, that describes the Soviet Union, that describes North Korea, that describes Cuba, but sadly that describes the modern left in the United States of America.
This is the big fear. You know, the promise is that everyone will be perfectly happy and everything will be stable. At the end, this is the big argument between Mustafa Mond and John the Savage. He says, you're demanding the right to be unhappy.
And ultimately, so John the Savage, he is the product of a tryst between the director of the factory, who 20, 30 years earlier had taken a vacation to the reservation. And he had been with this pretty young girl, and they're in this reservation in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And she stumbles and falls and gets abandoned there. And the director of the factory goes back to London and is all moving on. Well, it turns out that she's pregnant. She was not one of the sterilized infants created. She's pregnant, and she's born among these Native Americans who, you know, and it's kind of an amalgamation of Native American culture, but with religion that has self-flagellation, that combines Jesus with sort of ritual
native deities, right.
And so a couple of things are interesting. One, she gets old.
Yeah.
Because she's no longer being drugged up by the society.
Chemically perfect.
And her son John is raised in this reservation, and then Bernard Marx and Lenina go to visit and find him. They bring him back. They bring her back. So what happens? The director of the factory gets fired. Yeah. Like, he has sired a child, and she is the mother. I mean,
it's the most disgusting thing you could imagine.
But the society is horrified by her. And by the way, she's described as a woman in her 40s. A woman in her 40s who had the ordinary ravages of age. So she got a little bit chubby, she had some wrinkles. And people looked at her like, what is this? You think of the plastic world that we're increasingly inhabiting.
Yeah.
So when she gets back to the modern world, she spends every remaining moment on Soma. She basically goes into, and 24 hours a day, she simply takes the drug until she dies.
Just a drug binge for the rest of her life.
She has been programmed. The conflict between her programming and her experience are so stark. So John the Savage, as you noted, the final paragraph of the book, he pulls away from society. He tries to live on his own. He tries to, but he punishes himself. He drinks a mixture of warm water and mustard to make himself throw up, and he has a whip that he whips himself. Yeah. And at the end, society treats him like entertainment. Yeah. And the helicopters come and they see him with the whip, and it gets made into a movie that people find, oh, the savage, he whips him. And at the end, the final chapter, it is, I would say bittersweet, but it's just bitter. So Lenina comes, and she is, as much as she can be, in love with him, although she doesn't really understand what that means.
Her mind has not been shaped by Shakespeare and by religion, and so she just, any concept we would have of love is so foreign to her.
He beats her with the whip, and then he beats himself, and the people from the society who've come, and they've come like sightseers, they begin beating themselves as entertainment. Yeah. And he finally, hopelessly hangs himself, and that's how the book ends. What this is both a damning indictment of tyranny, but it's a beautiful and rapturous love story about individuality, about creativity, about what it means to be human.
And perhaps on that point, one ought to read it not merely for entertainment, though it is very entertaining, but also as a looking glass into the human condition, and maybe, before they burn all the books, as a path backward, a path to avoid a dystopian future that perhaps we can hope is not inevitable.
By the way, on a tangent, do you happen to know the temperature at which book paper burns?
I do not know.
At 451 degrees.
Oh,
and
yes, there's a
Fahrenheit
book about this.
451 is, of course, about the burning of books. And we are in a society
Yeah.
where the left wants to burn books. The left wants to ban anything they don't like. Now, I do have to say, is there another place your listeners can go to hear you and I talk about the great issues of the day?
You know, it's so funny that you bring that up, because I'm sure one hopes this is not the only place. There is one. That would be the Verdict podcast. You can get that wherever you listen to podcasts. We will talk about not only the Brave New World in fiction, but the Brave New World in nonfiction on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Senator Ted Cruz has added to his resume that he became a #1 podcaster in the whole country. I want to keep this conversation going on for 5 more hours. I guess we'll have to do it over on our other show. You've heard Smoke 'em while you got 'em, read 'em while you got 'em before the books go away. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Senator Cruz, thank you so much for being here. I'm Michael Knowles. This is the Book Club. See you next time. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Book Club on PragerU. PragerU is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we rely on donations from viewers like you to keep this content on the air. Please consider making a tax-deductible contribution today to help keep this content coming. Thank you very much.